A country whose new supreme leader, has not been seen by a single person in 4 months. No one has heard his voice. No one has seen his face. He has never once stood in front of a camera. And today, as his own father's funeral unfolds, millions are weeping in the streets of Tehran, beating their chests, chanting for revenge. And the man in whose name all of this is happening isn't even there. This isn't fiction. This is Iran in 2026. His name is Mojtaba Khamenei, Iran's third supreme leader. After his father Ali Khamenei was killed in a U.S. Israeli airstrike on 28 February 2026, the Assembly of Experts elected Mojtaba as the new supreme leader within a single week. But from that day until today, not one photograph, not one video, not one public statement in his own voice, only written statements released through state media under his name. Today, 5 of July 2026, on the second day of his father's funeral, state TV showed 3 of Khamenei's other sons, Mustafa, Maysam, and Masoud, praying beside the coffins. Mojtaba was nowhere to be seen. One mourner told Reuters she had kept hoping, right up until the last moment, that the new supreme leader himself would appear to bid his father farewell. That hope went unanswered. This is the question the entire world is now asking. Who is actually in control inside Iran? And if there is confusion even inside Tehran about whether the leader is alive, mobile, capable of functioning, what is Washington thinking as it watches that vacuum? That's the core of this video. We're not going to give you emotional headlines alone. We're going to walk you through the entire chain, starting with the funeral, moving through the stalled Doha peace talks, through the threats over the Strait of Hormuz, and ending with the military movements the Pentagon has already begun. Let's start with the image itself, or rather, the absence of one. According to Reuters reporting, people close to Mojtaba's inner circle say he was seriously wounded in the very same strike that killed his father, his mother, Zahra Haddad-Adel, and his wife. His face is reportedly badly disfigured, and he has significant injury to one or both legs. This information hasn't come from any official statement. It has leaked out from unofficial sources, which is itself telling of how much silence Iran's own state apparatus is maintaining on this subject. According to CNN's reporting, the Iranian government has laid out the entire funeral schedule. Tehran, then Qom, then Najaf and Karbala in Iraq, and finally burial in Mashhad on 9th of July. But nowhere has any plan for Mojtaba's appearance been announced. It's understood that such a decision, for security reasons, would not be made public in advance. But the question remains, can he even come? Can he speak? This isn't the first time his legitimacy has been questioned. When he was elected back in March 2026, the Wall Street Journal wrote that Iran was bringing back monarchy, because a supreme leader handing power to his own son, who didn't even hold the religious rank normally required, raised eyebrows. Before this, Mojtaba was only a Hojatol Islam, a rank below Ayatollah. Under Iran's constitution, the supreme leader must be a senior Islamic jurist. So state media abruptly began calling him Ayatollah, a move analysts say was largely cosmetic, meant to strengthen his religious legitimacy after the fact. All of this happened at the behest of hardline power centers, particularly groups aligned with the Revolutionary Guards, IRGC. They wanted a continuity candidate who could keep the system intact during a period of severe instability. But a leader who can't even publicly prove his own continuity, how real is that continuity, really? This is exactly the gap that becomes interesting when we turn to Washington. Because part of the U.S.-Israeli strategy that began in February 2026 was aimed at weakening Iran's top leadership enough that decision-making itself would fragment. Now, what we're seeing, an invisible leader, a confused succession, and a nation staging the largest state mourning in its history, is precisely the kind of scenario any outside power would view as an opening for its next move. According to Al Jazeera's reporting, between 15 and 20 million mourners are expected to take part in this funeral, making it the largest state funeral in Iran's history. That number is itself a political statement. It isn't just grief, it's a show of unity that Iran's leadership wants to project to the world that they haven't broken. But when the one person in whose name all of this is happening is missing from that very crowd, that show of unity becomes its own biggest weakness. Let's move now from the funeral to the place where the future of this entire war is actually being decided. Doha, Qatar. On 17th of June 2026, the U.S. and Iran signed a memorandum of understanding. It was a 60-day ceasefire extension during which both sides agreed to continue detailed negotiations. The future of the Strait of Hormuz, Iran's frozen assets, long-term sanctions relief, and most importantly, Iran's nuclear program. But within 2 weeks of that MOU being signed, new tensions erupted. Iran struck a commercial vessel it said had strayed from its approved route through the Strait of Hormuz. In response, U.S. Central Command, CENTCOM, said it struck 10 Iranian military targets. Iran then hit back at U.S. bases in Kuwait and Bahrain, drawing condemnation from both Gulf states. This is the same cycle we've seen repeatedly throughout this war. A small incident, a response, a counter-response, and then statements from both sides claiming they still want peace. That pattern alone tells you how fragile this ceasefire really is. According to Al Jazeera's reporting, Qatar and Pakistan, both mediators of this deal, said the indirect technical talks in Doha concluded with positive progress. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance also said the talks were going well and that discussions on the nuclear issue would begin soon. But here's an important detail. Iran has repeatedly stressed that these are indirect talks. Tehran has denied holding any direct negotiations with the U.S. Everything is being routed through Qatari and Pakistani mediators. That in itself is a signal. When a country handles even its own peace talks at arm's length, refusing direct engagement, it means domestic pressure is high enough that no Iranian official wants to be seen sitting face to face with the U.S. And what's the biggest source of that domestic pressure right now? The very same funeral, the same death to America chants, the same thirst for revenge sweeping through Tehran. According to Fox News reporting, chants of death to America and revenge echoed through Khamenei's funeral in time. Trump wants to show his domestic audience that his maximum pressure strategy is working. Iran wants to show its own domestic audience that it hasn't bowed. This same week, Iran's parliamentary speaker Mohammad Bagher Ghalibaf made a statement worth noting. He said passage through the Strait of Hormuz is only free of charge for 60 days, and that Iran will never give up its rights to collecting tolls on ships. That's a hard red line Washington has drawn. And then there's the warning from Iran's military that probably deserves the most attention. The commander of Iran's Qatam al-Anbiya Central Headquarters, Major General Ali Abdullahi, said that if the U.S. or Israel make any miscalculation during the funeral period, the response would be harsh and regret-inducing. It was a calculated statement, part request not to strike during mourning, part threat. Interestingly, Trump appeared to honor that request. He said publicly that he'd given Iran a week off for the funeral because, in his own words, we're nice. That line sounds casual, but it carries a real strategic signal. Washington also understands that striking right now would be diplomatically costly, especially with the world's cameras on Iran's funeral coverage and foreign dignitaries like Iraq's president, Pakistani PM Shehbaz Sharif, and Turkey's vice president present in Tehran. But that week off isn't permanent. Mediators themselves have confirmed that the next round of talks will only begin once the funeral concludes, meaning after 9 of July, when Khamenei is buried in Mashhad. So here's what we've established so far. A fragile ceasefire that keeps breaking and getting patched back together. An Iran that refuses to look weak in front of its own people. A U.S. that keeps emphasizing its position of maximum leverage. As Vance himself put it, Iran's nuclear program and conventional military have both been destroyed, which is why Trump is negotiating from a position of strength. And in the middle of all this, a new supreme leader who hasn't uttered a single word of his own. While talks continue on the diplomatic table, actual power always shows itself on the ground. And a great deal is moving on the ground right now. According to CNN's reporting, even as U.S. Iran talks were paused for the funeral, CENTCOM announced that a second Marine Expeditionary Unit, typically numbering more than 2,000 Marines, is operating in the Middle East. CENTCOM itself posted on X, the Boxer Amphibious Ready Group and the embarked 11th Marine Expeditionary Unit are currently operating in the Middle East as part of a scheduled deployment. This Amphibious Ready Group includes USS Boxer, an amphibious assault ship, USS Portland, which has just arrived in the region, and USS Comstock, which has already been operating there since May. This group has now joined USS Tripoli and its escorts, which have been in the region since late March. In other words, even during the funeral, when everything is officially paused, the U.S. is keeping its naval and marine presence active and in fact expanding it. Even more interesting is a report from the Jerusalem Post, which says CENTCOM is considering relocating its operational systems from bases in Bahrain, Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia to Israel, to put more distance between them and Iranian missile and drone attacks. According to the Wall Street Journal's reporting, one option under consideration is building a new base in the Negev Desert large enough to house the entire American force stationed there, or expanding an existing Air Force base in the Negev. Why? Because the U.S. Navy's NSA Bahrain base has suffered damage in this war so severe that rebuilding it is estimated to cost around $400 million, including rebuilding 2 satellite communication terminals and a communications management facility. Some structures may never be rebuilt at all. Command and control nodes may have to be moved underground instead. This isn't just a defensive adjustment, it's a strategic repositioning. It shows that the Pentagon itself takes seriously the possibility that its current bases can't offer the level of protection needed if escalation resumes. Notably, in one of his own rare public statements back in May 2026, Mojtaba Khamenei posted on X that America would no longer have a safe haven for mischief and the establishment of military bases in the region. His own words carried a clear warning. If, in response to that warning, the U.S. is now moving its own bases to Israel, it means both sides are taking each other's threats seriously, and both are adjusting their positioning accordingly in case this 60-day truce collapses. Around the same time, CENTCOM also hosted a regional security dialogue in Bahrain, attended by defense leaders from 12 nations, mostly from the Gulf. CENTCOM said all the leaders underscored their shared commitment to keeping commerce flowing freely through the Strait of Hormuz. Iran's Deputy Foreign Minister, Kazem Garibabadi, responded directly. The strait is defined under Iran's command, not CENTCOM. He also said a military summit in Bahrain cannot establish legal order and security for the Persian Gulf. This exchange shows that the Hormuz issue is no longer just a shipping route dispute. It has become a symbol of sovereignty and regional dominance. Whoever controls, or claims to control, this strait holds real economic and military leverage over the entire Gulf region. Alongside all of this, Trump is also sending a message to his own American audience over America's 250th Independence Day. The same weekend, CENTCOM posted on X honoring the millions who've deployed abroad, defended freedom, and proudly served across the region. This messaging shows that Washington isn't presenting its military presence as merely a temporary crisis response. It is presenting it as a long-term commitment, one where troops will keep honorably serving. So if we put it all together, naval assets are increasing, bases are being relocated for greater resilience, and regional alliances are being formalized through defense dialogues. All of this is happening while the diplomatic table is only producing statements of positive progress. No final deal. When one side ramps up its military positioning this actively during a negotiation, it usually means one thing. It wants to be ready for every scenario, whether a deal happens or not. Now we get to the part where we need to be careful. This section is grounded in facts, but the final judgment, what will Washington do, hasn't been officially confirmed by anyone. This is analysis, not prediction. It's important to understand it that way. Here's them very hard, but we're getting along very well now. That statement does two things. First, it frames his military campaign as when he said, the people criticizing the administration for negotiating are the same people who once encouraged going a little bit further and dropping a few more bombs in places like Afghanistan. His point was that Trump has plenty of options in 2026, but if bombs are ever dropped again, it will be for something specific, not random escalation. This statement matters because it shows there's an internal debate happening inside Washington. Should there be more military action, or should diplomacy be given time? Where is that specific trigger most likely to come from? The Strait of Hormuz? Trump has already said that if talks fail, the U.S. could impose a toll on the shipping channel, an economic pressure tactic, but one that in practice could also mean a more active U.S. Navy presence in Hormuz to enforce a no free passage policy. On the other side, Iran's parliamentary speaker Ghalibaf has made clear Iran will never give up its rights in Hormuz, and Iran's military has already threatened a decisive and swift response to any U.S. interference. This is a classic escalation setup. Both sides have publicly stated their red lines, and those red lines directly conflict. That doesn't mean war is guaranteed, but it does mean the next incident, like the commercial ship incident that has already occurred, could turn into a major escalation very quickly. The second factor worth keeping in mind is Mojtaba Khamenei's own position. Until he appears publicly, it remains unclear, even inside Iran, where the final decision-making authority actually sits, with Mojtaba himself or with the IRGC commanders who backed his succession. Reporting on the succession process via Wikipedia's coverage of the 2026 Supreme Leader election suggests his selection was itself a signal from IRGC-aligned hardliners, choosing a continuity candidate who could hold the system together during instability. If that's accurate, if real power sits with IRGC commanders, while Mojtaba remains a largely symbolic figure who can't even appear publicly due to his injuries, then Washington faces a completely different calculation. Because then, how much actual authority do negotiators like Ghalibaf really hold at the table? Or does every decision have to be routed back to an invisible chain of command with no public face? This uncertainty is exactly what makes it both harder and more urgent for any outside power, the U.S. included, to plan its next move. Harder because it's unclear who the deal is actually being made with. More urgent because if the leadership itself is confused, This is precisely the moment when external pressure can have the greatest effect. That's likely why we're seeing Washington run diplomacy and military positioning in parallel. This dual-track approach isn't new. It's classic pressure diplomacy. Keep talking, while also building up your military capability so that if talks fail, a response is ready immediately. So if we want a direct answer to the question, has Washington already planned its next move? The most honest answer is this. Washington almost certainly has contingency, plans for multiple scenarios, as any major military power would. But no confirmed report says a specific new attack or operation has been planned. What we can observe is positioning, assets moving, bases relocating, and statements being calibrated diplomatically so that Washington stays ready for either outcome, deal, or no deal. That pattern alone tells us a lot, even without any confirmed leak. Let's now bring everything together into a timeline so you know exactly what to watch for in the coming days. First, 9 July 2026. This is the day Ali Khamenei will be buried in Mashhad, near the Imam Reza Shrine, in his own hometown. This marks the final day of the entire funeral process. Before that, processions will also take place in Qom and in the Iraqi cities of Najaf and Karbala. It will be an emotional climax for the country. The biggest question hanging over this entire week: will Mujtaba Khamenei appear publicly at this final burial? If he does, it will significantly strengthen his legitimacy, no matter how injured he is. If he doesn't, which has been the pattern so far, the question of who actually controls Iran will only grow louder. Second key marker: once the funeral ends, according to mediators, the next round of indirect U.S. Iran talks will begin in Doha. These talks will show whether both sides are genuinely moving toward a deal or simply buying time. The nuclear program will be the most critical part of this round because it's the issue where compromise is hardest. Iran will likely never publicly compromise on its nuclear rights, even if, in reality, the program has been largely destroyed, as Vance has claimed, and the U.S. won't back off its demand for complete denuclearization. Third marker: the interim deal over the Strait of Hormuz, where free passage is only guaranteed for 60 days. That window is approaching its end. As that deadline nears, expect rhetoric from both sides to intensify further, as we've already seen in the statements from Ghalibaf and Vance. Fourth marker: CENTCOM's military positioning. If, in the coming weeks, we see Marine expeditionary units growing further or the Bahrain to Israel base relocation plan taking concrete shape, it will be a strong signal that Washington is moving its contingency planning into active mode, regardless of whether a deal happens. Now, the bigger picture. This entire situation, an invisible leader, a fragile ceasefire, a disputed strait, and a military buildup on both sides, isn't just a story about the U.S. versus Iran. It's a larger question about what happens to diplomacy when a country's top leadership itself becomes fragmented, when succession isn't clear, when the public face is literally missing. Traditional diplomacy is built on one assumption: that both sides have an identifiable decision-maker who can stand behind their word. If that assumption itself starts to break down in Iran's case, if real power actually sits within a distributed network of IRGC commanders rather than with a single leader, then this entire negotiation process becomes inherently more unpredictable. And that's what makes this story different from typical who's the next target war coverage. It isn't just about missile counts and troop movements. It's a deeper structural crisis unfolding inside Iran's political system, one whose effects reach directly into regional stability, oil prices, and global shipping. Remember this from CBS News' reporting. The cost of this war to U.S. taxpayers has already reached an estimated $113.3 billion as of 16th of June 2026. That number isn't just a statistic. It shows this war isn't confined to the Middle East. Its effects have reached American gas prices, which remain more than 60 cents higher than they were a year ago. Global supply chains, natural gas, fertilizer, aviation, tourism, are all affected by this war. So when we ask, is Washington already planning its next through diplomacy? As Vance himself has said, this could lead to a permanently transformed Iran. Through military action, as has already happened before, a response could come in reaction to a specific trigger. And in the middle of all this stands a silent leader who perhaps doesn't even know what his own next move will be, because that decision may not actually be his to make. This story is far from over. The 9th July burial, the post-funeral Doha talks, and the 60-day Hormuz window will all shape the direction of this story over the next 2 weeks. If you think this story matters, we'll keep bringing you every update. Because as much as we're seeing right now, there's just as much still hidden beneath the surface.